Hello, on the Wine Road, travelers. On today's podcast, you're going to hear about Grenache and Rhone Valley varietals. We're heading to San Luis Obispo County's Pas Robles. Buckle up. Let's hit the road.
We've got about 3 acres of Picpoul at Tablas, and it's always a favorite. I'm going to be pouring a 2010 Picpoul at the library tasting this afternoon.
Great.
We have a working title on one of our collaboration wines now that is Es su culpa. It's his fault. I say it's his fault. He got me into the wine business, and he says it's my fault that he was successful, which is not true.
Now we can say very happily, oh, this is all we do. We just focus on top. We focus on what makes us happy, which is make wine, meet people, and drink a little bit of wine.
The Hospice du Rhone event is an atypical wine tasting in California. In the French Rhone Valley region, there are a great number of wine varieties like Grenache, one of our favorites, Syrah and Viognier, to Mourvedre, Cinsault, Marsanne, Roussanne, Picpoul, Terroir Noir, Ugni Blanc. 22 varietals in all were featured. 125 producers from California, Oregon, Washington, and France were in attendance. It was a taste extravagance. This year's event was held April 21st through the 23rd at the Pas Robles Event Center. The Hospice du Rhone Blackberry Farm Wine and Culinary event was held on May 22nd through 25th. While I was there, of course, I lined up some interviews. They included General Manager and family member Jason Haas from Tablas Creek Vineyard, Ted Ross of Hayseed and Housden, who donates 50% of his wine sales to local charities. How awesome is that? And Elena Barrios, who with her winemaking husband Stanley are gaining attention with their outstanding full-flavored Rhone varietal blends at Top Winery. All right, that's enough of the introduction. Let's get into the interviews. I'll start with Jason Haas of the well-known and respected Tablas Creek Vineyard. They were one of the pioneers in Paso who partnered with Chateau de Beaucastel in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. That's the standout region in southern Rhone. And here's how their relationship came about. Jason's father, John Haas, was a wine importer, toured France often, then decided to start his own business, Vineyard Brands, and developed a relationship with Jacques Perrin of Chateau de Beaucastel to import their wine exclusively. And thus began the relationship between the Haas and Perrin families.
Yeah, I mean, my dad was already an established importer at that point. I mean, he'd been importing wines from Burgundy and Bordeaux for 15 years.
And that was a family business?
It was sort of a family business. He had been delegated by his father, who ran a retailer in New York, to go and develop the import portfolio for their retail business. So the import business piece of it was new. The retail business was something that had been in my family for a couple of generations. But he ended up in the cellars of Jacques Perrin in Châteauneuf-du-Pape in 1967 because he decided that Châteauneuf was making great wines and he wanted to add one to his portfolio. And that was one of the handful of places that were making estate bottled wines, which he thought was really important, and yet didn't have an American agent.
Chateau de Beaucastel has a historic estate in Châteauneuf-du-Pape.
Yeah, they've been in the same estate since 1909, so they're on their 5th generation now.
But the property goes back to like the 1500s.
It does indeed. If you look at the crest that's on the Beaucastel bottles, that's on the wall of the living room of the old chateau, and that's the family crest of Pierre de Beaucastel from the 16th century.
I wasn't surprised to see a Beaucastel wine on the wine menu at dinner last night, so I ended up getting it, and it was fantastic.
I would hope so. No, it's great. And one of the things I love about Beaucastel is that they're one of the greatest estates in the world, but they make wines that you can actually buy and drink. They're not like crazy priced. They're not impossible to find. Their goal is to make wines that you can drink and enjoy.
Now, from what I understand, because on the wine menu they had 2 versions, the Châteauneuf-du-Pape and the one that I bought, which was $65. The Châteauneuf-du-Pape was, I think, $165. Uh-huh. And the Somme said, they're basically right across the street, so there's not a lot of difference.
They're literally right across the street. So So Jacques Perrin, who was the patriarch of the family, was involved with the group. He was actually one of the organizers of the group to draw the boundary lines for the Châteauneuf-du-Pape appellation. And he thought that it was really important to show that he was not giving himself any favoritism, and drew the line that separates Châteauneuf-du-Pape and Côte du Rhone through his own estate. So there's about a third of the Beaucastel estate that's on the wrong side of that Châteauneuf-du-Pape Côte du Rhone line. So I would assume you ordered the Coudelet de Beaucastel, which is their Côte du Rhone portion, but it's their same estate, farmed the same way, owned the same, just doesn't have the benefit of that appellation price bump.
Yeah, well, it certainly was well worth it, that's for sure. During the mid-20th century, they really developed their organic farming practices and continue to do so.
Yeah, they've been fully organic since the 1950s, out of this belief that that's really the best way to express your terroir. The less you put on from the outside, the more the vines are going to taste like the place in which they were grown. So for them, that's the organizing factor, and that was our baseline at Tablas Creek, is that when we started in 1989, we were going to farm organically because we wanted to give ourselves every shot to show off our terroir, even if we didn't know what that terroir was going to taste like.
Right. He's Jason Haas, the partner and general manager of Tablas Creek Vineyard in Pas Robles. His father, Robert, and the Perrins searched around California for the climate and soils that matched the Beaucastel region, and they found it there in the Adelaida region west of Paso.
Yeah, so it was Jacques' two sons, Jean-Pierre and Francois, who my dad became friendly with, and with whom he hatched the idea of kind of translating Châteauneuf, or doing a riff on Châteauneuf in California. And that came out of their visits to California to promote their French wines, and coming away convinced that, like, this is a Mediterranean climate. These grapes from the Mediterranean part of France should thrive here if we could find the right soils, we could find the right microclimate. So in 85 they put together the partnership and started looking for a spot, and 89 bought 120 acres here in Pas Robles, because this is where they found the best match in terms of soils and climate and rainfall for the Southern Rhone.
And what were you doing at that time? How old were you?
I was in high school. I was definitely not involved in this search.
Yeah, where were you living at that time?
I was living in Vermont, which is where I grew up, where Vineyard Brands, the import company that my dad founded, was based. So I didn't make my first trip out here until 95. And when I got out here, I came out in January, and I was out here for 10 days on a break during college. And it rained every day for the 10 days I was out here. Oh. And it was so green out here, it looked like Ireland. Right. Imagine my surprise to come out here and to learn that it really wasn't like that. But no, I've been out here full time since 2002, so it was 2 decades last week, and it's been really amazing to see kind of the Pas Robles community and the Rhone community grow up over those decades.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, it's grown considerably since then, huh?
I mean, we're sitting here at Hospice du Rhone, and there's 120 producers from all over the world gathering in Pas Robles to share vintages new and old, and varieties new and old, and viticulture techniques, and it's pretty cool.
And do you attribute that to your father's relationship with the parents, and was he the catalyst for all of this? At least for the French version of it?
I think he was a catalyst. It wasn't the only one, but I think the fact that they would look all over California and choose Paso was kind of an instant dose of credibility for the region. And then there's a community that's grown up around us, fueled also in part by the fact that we brought in cuttings from Beaucastel and then made them available to the broader community. So there's grape varieties that didn't exist in California before, like Counoise and Grenache Blanc and Picpoul, that are here because of our choice. And that certainly helped.
That was going to be my next question, because to ensure those similarities with Beaucastel, your father imported the vines and they came from the area, and what a great idea.
We felt like it was a necessary idea. I mean, it was expensive and it took time, because when you bring in grapevine cuttings, you have to wait 3 years for them to be cleared by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, so you don't bring in a virus or a pest inadvertently and wipe out your industry.
Which had happened several times before that.
Yes. This is a legitimate fear. Yes. But I think the opportunity to work with these varieties, we felt like was necessary if we wanted to really know if the idea worked. So if we had just lived with the grapes that were already here, so there was pretty good Syrah, there was pretty good Viognier, there was some Grenache that didn't have a great reputation, there was a little bit of Mourvedre that people were suspicious that hadn't come from France, had instead come from Spain. That was about it. Like, if that was what our raw materials were, it would be really hard to know whether or not this place was capable of something great. And so bringing in the same key varieties that they use at Beaucastel was, for us, a chance just to make sure we were working with the full collection of raw materials that were out there.
You mentioned the time it took, and I saw that they were imported in 1990 but weren't planted until 1994.
Yeah, because you have to import them and get them through the quarantine, and then you have to propagate enough to start planting your vineyard. So it's not like you can get those 6 vines out of quarantine and then plant them and then you're ready to go. I mean, you got to reproduce them into the thousands before you can start planting.
Yeah.
So that takes another couple of years. So and then you got to wait for them to produce a crop. So our first vintage wasn't until 97.
That's the one thing about the wine industry. It can sometimes be a slow-moving business. And you got to be prepared for that. Jason mentioned that in 1990, his father was able to import 9 grape varieties and multiple clones from their French partner, Château de Beaucastel, in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. What an incredible opportunity for a new winery. In 2003, the partners decided to complete the Beaucastel Châteauneuf-du-Pape collection by importing 7 more varieties. And they are very rare, as you'll hear. Can you run through those off the top of your head?
I can even. At that point, we had been so pleasantly surprised with how some of the obscure varieties did here. So grapes like Grenache Blanc and Counoise and Picpoul had turned out to be really exciting, that we thought it would be a shame not to see how the full collection of Châteauneuf-du-Pape grapes worked. So that meant there were 7 additional varieties that we hadn't yet brought in. So that was Muscardin, Picardin, Vaccarez, Terre Noir, Cinsault, Bourboulenc, and Clairette Blanche. And some of these are reasonably widely planted. There's 1,000 acres of Bourboulenc. There's a few thousand acres of Cinsault. But like Picardin, we planted half an acre of Picardin in 2013 and increased the world's Picardin population by 40%. These are grapes that are so obscure that you really don't even find them vinified on their own in France. So the opportunity to plant even half an acre of them and then bottle them on their, vinify them on their own, choose whether we want to bottle them on their own, like that's something that hasn't been done in generations.
I know Picpoul's been getting a little interest lately, and there's probably not a whole lot of that around the U.S., is there?
Something less than 50 acres, because at 50 acres it shows up on the California Grape Crush report, and below that it's just other red or other white. So we've got about 3 acres of Picpoul at Tablas, and it's always a favorite. I'm going to be pouring a library Picpoul, a 2010 Picpoul at the library tasting this afternoon.
Great.
But it's one of the grapes that I think has turned out to be really well suited for California, and that you're going to see a lot more of in future decades.
So obviously you're using a lot of these for blends, but how many different varietals are you bottling these days?
It varies by year. So we try during our blending trials to identify at a minimum like 4 or 5 that we think are so characteristic that year that we need to bottle them on their own. But if we have a productive vintage and we have the ability to, we might do 10 or 12. So it just depends on what we taste in the blending trials. We're not going to force something into a bottle on its own if it's not expressive of what that grape is all about and if it's not complete. But this year I think we bottled 12 different varietals on their own.
It's unusual but not surprising that your family decided to create your own nursery, and it was quite robust at one point, wasn't it?
It was a huge piece of what we ended up doing, and it was not part of the original plan. I mean, the original plan was to make enough vines to grow ourselves. But we started getting requests, even when the vines were still in quarantine, from other vineyards and winemakers if we would sell them some vine cuttings. And we made the decision not to try to keep these vines proprietary, but instead to make them available to the broader community, because we felt that would help the whole category get itself established.
Sure.
And we ended up, between 1996 and 2004, we ended up selling over 1 million grapevine cuttings to hundreds of vineyards. And then we partnered with a nursery up in Sonoma to expand that in 2005, and we've now sold over 5 million cuttings. And I think that's been a big piece in helping the Rhone Rangers movement become what it's been. It never actually made us any money. That wasn't the point. But it was the idea that kind of the rising tide lifts all the boats, and if we could be a part of an active and vibrant and creative and successful community, like that was going to help us.
Yeah, and generate interest with the consumer. You know, they're not likely to buy something that they're not familiar with by a bottle. You know, but if they get familiar with it, then you got them.
I mean, we're all in this together, trying to establish these relatively less known grapes in an American wine market that 10 years ago most, like even reasonably serious wine lovers, like they probably could name 6 grape varieties. Right. So there are 3,000 grapes that people make wine out of around the world, and you've got to fight for recognition for anything that's outside of that kind of big 6.
And I understand you guys are dry farmed. Is that true?
We are largely dry farmed. We planted our first dry farmed block in 2000 that has been never irrigated. At this point, we have about 40% of our plantings, or like 55 acres, that are planted, wide-spaced, head-trained, dry farmed, unirrigatable, no irrigation infrastructure. We've also been working to wean the closer spaced blocks that we planted closer together to encourage competition, to wean those off of irrigation. So that's an ongoing process. It depends a lot on what happens in the winter. If we have a good rainfall winter, then we don't need to irrigate those established blocks at all. If we're 2 years into a drought, we'll probably give them a drink at one point in the middle of the summer to keep them going.
Do you still help out the young vines, the new plantings, with a little bit of water too?
That's for the closer space blocks, absolutely. We get enough rainfall here in Paso. We get about 26 inches a year, which is enough on an annual basis to dry farm. But it all comes between November and April. And that means that by the time you get to September, the top 4 or 5 feet of topsoil are dry. And if you are planting young vines, you've got a 1-year-old grapevine, its roots are not going to be down to where there's water, and you're going to lose a lot of your vines. Right. So what we'll do is we'll irrigate them once or maybe twice, even in those very early years, just to keep them alive. But we'll irrigate them relatively deeply so that they're not encouraged to grow roots at the surface, but instead we'll irrigate deeply but infrequently, and then it dries out from the top down, and the deeper roots get rewarded. And that helps get those roots trained down to the layers where there's going to be water year-round.
Go, dive deep, go for it.
That's it, exactly.
Nice. And that adds complexity and greater tasting wine.
Yeah, I mean, the more of your root mass that's down in your deeper soils, the more character of place you're going to pull out. Yeah. Topsoil is just not that unique. It's just decayed organic matter. So you want it down, for us, into this calcareous, clay, crumbly stuff.
Do you have a brother or two that's involved as well?
I have a half-brother who took over big chunks of the import business from my dad when he retired from that. And then I have an older sister and older half-sister and a younger sister who are not in the business.
Okay. So when your father passed in 2018, you were handed the keys. You're running the show.
Well, I'd been running the show for a few years before that. He'd stepped back little by little over the 2010s. He had a stroke in 2016, which really slowed him down, though he was still as sharp as ever till the end. He made it to almost 91. Wow. But, I mean, I've had the pleasure of working with him for 15 years. We have an amazing team. We have our partners, the parents, who are regular parts. We have Cesar Perrin here this week to work on blending.
Fantastic.
So it's not we're not a one-man show. I didn't feel like I was just sort of like pushed out in the middle of the ocean and said, "Okay, go." And it's been an honor to kind of walk in his footsteps and take things to the next level.
And joy for you? You weren't like thinking about becoming a musician or working in finance. You ended up going where you were happy to go.
Yeah, this is something that I always thought I would end up in the end. And I didn't start out doing this. I have a master's degree in archaeology, and I taught for a little while, and then I worked in tech for a while. My dad always encouraged me to go out and do other things that would give me useful skills, with the knowledge that those would come in handy later. So I don't feel like I ever got to the point where I was feeling pushed into this and then like pushed back and rebelled. It was always a pretty appealing and attractive destination in the long run.
Yeah, most family wineries I talk with, they're the same way. You know, they want their kids to experience other things. You know, but it's an interesting breakdown of how many come back, how many don't. You know, if you have 3 kids, 1 or 2 may come back, 1 may not.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to love doing this if you want to do it, if you want to be successful at it.
Right.
And so, like, if you feel like you're pushed into doing it and it's not something that you chose, that's not going to work.
I was just talking with Elena of Top this morning, and she likes harvest and helping out her husband with harvest. He loves it, but you have to, because if you don't, it's not going to be much of a career for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty all-encompassing life, and if it's not something that makes you happy, like, you're not going to do it well.
Yeah. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to swing by and chat with me today, and have a great tasting and wonderful weekend here.
Thanks. I plan to.
Yeah. What an incredible opportunity to work with one of the greatest chateaus in France, Chateau de Beaucastel, Jason Haas of Tablas Creek. My wife Meredith and I had a good time working and tasting, of course, at Hospice du Rhone. We also scheduled a tasting at Tablas Creek. It was good to try some varietals that Jason was talking about. They have an attractive outdoor and indoor tasting space with a gift shop and views of stacked barrels behind a glass wall. Learn more at tablascreek.com. My next interview is with Ted Ross, the proprietor and winemaker at Hayseed in Housden, just 1 block east of the downtown square. It's a small yet comfortable building with a garage door that he opens on beautiful days. Ted is a laid-back guy, but can be quick-witted. I chatted with him on the phone before our trip, and he was gracious enough to meet my wife and me at 10 a.m., although he worked until 10 p.m. the night before. Because he's in the position to donate 50% of his sales to charitable organizations, I was curious about his background.
Well, I started coming up to Paso about 15 years ago, just on wine weekends with my partner, and kind of fell in love with the town and the community. So made the decision to buy a place here and move here. And been here full-time, I think, just about 9 years. We bought our house a couple years before moving here and just used it on weekends. I still had kids in school, so... And we love the fact that Paso is full of good wine and great food options for a small community. That's kind of unusual in California. But never expected to get in the wine business.
Right. Yeah. I've said that about my radio show. But you were a connoisseur and you loved learning more and more about it, and you just kind of fell into it, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I started, a friend of mine, a new acquaintance when we moved to Paso, was about to launch a brand with his wife, Enrique Torres and Nora Torres. And they had a label and a logo, had made their wines. He works as a winemaker for a bigger program Monday through Friday, but this was something they were going to do for themselves. And so they had wine, but they hadn't sold any of it yet. And they didn't have much of a sales plan or much know-how around marketing, which is my background. So I offered just as friends to help them put together a marketing strategy and execute on that and start selling their wines online through a nice website and that sort of thing. And anyway, just helping out a friend, that's kind of what got me into the business, at least on the marketing and sales side. And then after doing that for about 3 years with them, Enrique asked me if I wanted to make wine with him. I'm like, well, that sounds fun. What are we going to do with it? And he's like, well, you'll sell it. Yeah. Like, you mean my own wine? Like my own license, my own brand? He goes, yeah, why not? Wow. I was like, okay.
That's great that it was his idea and not yours.
Yeah. We have a working title on one of our collaboration wines now that is Es Su Culpa. It's his fault.
Well,
so
that's great.
Yeah, I say it's his fault. He got me into the wine business, and he says it's my fault that he was successful, which is not true, because his wines are awesome and they sell well because they're really quality wines, and he's an excellent winemaker. But he does appreciate the help I gave him on the marketing side early on. So.
And it was his fault for putting that monkey on your back.
Yeah, for sure.
How'd you come up with the name?
Long story. I was really struggling with names. I was in marketing my whole career, did some branding, and I knew naming was kind of tough, but it's like having to eat one's own dog food. When you have to do it for yourself, you really take it seriously, maybe too seriously. So it took me a long time to come up with any name, and I decided to do what a lot of people do, just kind of name it after a family. So Housden was my grandmother's last name, so it's got a family connection. And so I incorporated it as Housden Wine Inc., and I got my logo designed by a local girl that's a really talented graphic artist. Had an H, of course, for Housden. And then one day I was looking at one of the wine maps, and I noticed that there were a lot of wineries that started with the letter H in Pas Robles. Mm-hmm. And I counted, and there were actually more wineries that started with the letter H than any other letter. Interesting. So then I thought, well, as a new winery and a small winery, I could kind of get lost in that shuffle. So I needed to do something, but I already had a trademark registered with the H on it and all of that. So I decided I would add another H word to it and get a little alliteration. So I came up with Hayseed. So Hayseed, as many people know, kind of stands for, or means country bumpkin. Okay. It's kind of a nice way of saying hick. And I'm a bit of a country bumpkin. I grew up 2 hours east of here, which is, as I like to say, the Midwest of California, the great Central Valley near Fresno, Visalia, that area. So I'm a bit of a country bumpkin. And so it kind of fit. And I also knew that I wanted the brand to be approachable. My model's a little unique because we're raising money for, and not just money, but also awareness for some great local nonprofits that look after the community. And one thing I know about Paso is that there are some absolutely phenomenal wines here, and wineries and winemakers that really appeal to people well-heeled folks that come into the community with a lot of financial resource. There is a bit of a divide between wines that are popular among that set of folks, the weekend travelers, and the local people that have been here for generations, perhaps. And I didn't want to turn anybody off that was local, because I am raising awareness and money for local organizations. So I knew I wanted to shoot in kind of the other direction, which is, keep my price, or my wines moderately priced, and, a comfortable, easy space that people can come in. So I don't discourage locals from coming in. So I thought the Hayseed, kind of name kind of worked with all of that.
Yeah. Maybe a humble way to present your image.
Yeah, for sure. Humility is important.
Yeah. I did a research because I was thinking, why hayseed? And I came across definition that it's a person from the country, especially a simple, unsophisticated one. I thought, okay, I guess that's probably what he's going for.
Absolutely, yes. It's apt, very apt. I try not to overthink things, especially things I don't know a lot about. When I first started, I knew very little about winemaking. So I know more than I did, but I still have a lot to learn. So I still try to be as humble as possible.
Yeah. You will always have a lot to learn.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's what I've learned in doing this show for 8.5 years, that everybody in the industry says they're still learning.
Yeah, I mean, one of the two winemakers I work that I'm learning through is still working for somebody that's got roughly 40 years of experience to his 20. So he's a perfect example. His name is Enrique Torres, and he still works for a guy named Alan Kinney.
Ted Ross of Country Bumpkin and Hayseed and Housden. I told you he's a pretty chill guy, although he was in the tasting room a couple of hours earlier than necessary. I mentioned earlier he donates 50% of his bottle sales to local charitable partners, as he calls them. Initially, it was bottles of 4 varietals and organizations, but his portfolio has been growing.
Yep. We started with 4 nonprofit partners because we had 4 wines. So the model is each wine that we make raises money for a specific local nonprofit that looks after a segment of the community we care about and animals. And now we have 8 wines in our program. So we've got 8 nonprofit partners. And we say partners because we want these to be long-term relationships. And we want to keep making the same wines year after year, vintage after vintage, and kind of keep that focus on that organization, the whole time we're doing that. So it's possible that we may add 1 or 2 more wines to the program over time, but we're pretty set with the nonprofits that we've got. And they look after all kinds of folks in the community. So homeless folks, a great organization called Paso Cares that's been around for 10 years that feeds the homeless every single day, 365 days a year. Lumina Alliance that provides counseling and other services, restraining order support, and that sort of thing for folks that are experiencing domestic violence, intimate partner abuse. 805 and DocuFund, which looks after folks that are here doing the heavy lifting in the wineries and the vineyards, restaurants, hotels, etc., that don't have citizenship and as such are not able to get government assistance during times of crisis. So 805 and DocuFund provides financial assistance to those folks. And then we have a wine called Warrior, which is a blend of Cabernet and Petit Syrah. It's one of our first vintages, 2016's first wine that we made. We call it Warrior. It raises money for Operation Surf, and they take vets out surfing as a form of therapy, vets that have come back from conflict areas with PTSD or other issues. And, I don't know if you want to hear about all of them, but...
definitely mention the animal one, because people love animals.
So our Pinot Noir, which we call Pray for Love, raises money for Wine for Paws. Wine for Paws is a 501c3, but the format is, it's a weekend event that takes place in Paso, and it has for the last 13 years, that raises money for Woods Humane Society. And generally, or typically, Sarah Tomasetti, who started the organization, who's a huge animal lover, raises around $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 for Woods Humane Society through this weekend event. So we certainly support Wine for Paws that weekend. This year it happened 2 weeks ago, April 8th. We had the formal kickoff party here. We did a lot of things over the course of the month, but especially that weekend to help generate a lot of awareness and a lot of funds for Wine for Paws. And about 70, 80 wineries participate. This year we raised about $6,200 here at Hayseed, and I think her total take was around $65,000. So we're proud to say we did about 10% of the money that she collected. So
Overall, it's real impressive and respectable that you've decided to do this. And I asked you about that, and do you remember what you told me on the phone about that?
not exactly, no. What did I say?
Something about you made enough money in your career, and when you retired to do this, you thought, why not?
Yeah, it's a little, well, let's just say I didn't do enough to be proud of for a long, long time. So I like to say I didn't really do anything for anybody for 58 years, and then I retired, and I thought it was about time. And I always used the excuse when I was working and raising my family, working hard to make myself successful and them successful, and therefore not doing a whole lot for anybody else, that when I retired, I would then use that opportunity to give back. So I retired, and it was put up or shut up time, and so here we are.
Okay. Well, advertising, can be looked down upon, but you made a lot of money for some of your clients, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. And some of that would probably find its way into a philanthropic event sometime, somewhere, but never because of me. So, anyway.
Good for him to put up in response to his own personal challenge to do good. You can see all the charities he supports at hayseedandhousden.com. Housden is Housdon. Let's talk about your wine. I like the collection that you have here. You kind of here and there, and a good variety of varietals. we talked about that earlier. Why don't you take us through real quick?
So the complexion of the program is half varietals I like and half varietals that I'm able to get. Because fruit sourcing is a big issue, especially as a brand new person in the scene here in Paso. Yeah. But for the fact that I'm working to support a number of nonprofits, I probably wouldn't have the good relationships that I do with the vineyards that are selling me fruit. A lot of the vineyards and wineries that own those vineyards support some of the same organizations I do. So that kind of common thread was what has enabled me to create a program with roughly 8 different wines, 8 different varietals. We do have a couple of blends in the program. So we have a couple of different whites. We have a Chardonnay as well as a Sauv Blanc. We do 2 versions of the Chardonnay. One's called Steel Rains. It's done in stainless steel. One is called Excuse My Dust. That's done in new French oak, at least through fermentation. So it's lightly oaked. Both of those wines raise money for Lumina Alliance. And then the Sauv Blanc, Monterey County fruit. So those are my 2 whites. We have a rosé of Grenache. I just bottled that yesterday. So we've done one every year since we opened in 2019, which was a 2018 vintage. So this is our 2021. It's 100% Grenache, direct press, so very dry, very light, very low alcohol. And then among our reds, we have Pray for Love, which is the wine I referenced a few minutes ago that raises money for Wine for Pas. That's a Pinot Noir 777 clone, one of my favorite varietals, so something I hope to have every year, maybe mixing it up year after year, vintage after vintage, not always the same clone necessarily, but at some point we'll probably standardize or stabilize on the ones that we like. And then I have a nice Grenache, cool climate Grenache. I get that fruit down in Edna Valley as well. So unlike most Paso Grenaches, which tend to be very bold, very robust, beautiful, but also extremely high in alcohol, I like something a little lighter, so I get my fruit down in Edna for that reason, just cooler. Yeah. And then we have a blend called La Macha, 4 different Spanish varietals. Tempranillo is dominant, so 35 this year, which we're pouring the 2019 vintage. 35% Tempranillo, 25% Graciano, 25% Mataro, and 15% Garnacha. So very interesting wine. A lot of people are unfamiliar with Graciano. That gives the wine some texture and some interesting spice and an interesting finish. Just makes it, which is I think the purpose of a blend, is to get something very, very special and unique. People ask me sometimes what my favorite varietal is, and I tell them any 2 that you put together. So it's just kind of true. Yeah, a little bit. And then that's partly why we fell in love with Paso wines. GSMs, California Côte du Rhone, just Paso in a glass. And I'll, in 2021 vintage, have a GSM that's Westside fruit. So that'll be a new wine that we bring in. But probably it'll simply replace the Grenache that we have. I don't know that we can support more than one red Rhone in the program. Yeah, right. And then we have, to kind of finish things off, we have Warrior, which I mentioned earlier, which is a blend of Cab and Petit Syrah. It's usually 75 to 80% Cabernet, 20 or so percent Petit Syrah.
Well, it's a comfortable modern tasting room you have here, and you got a big garage door that can open up and let in the outdoor air.
Yeah, it's certainly great when the weather's good, as it almost always is in Paso. It never gets terribly cold. It does get fairly hot in the summer, so we'll have to close that garage door. But we tend to keep it open year-round if we can. We have heaters and things to make sure people are comfortable when it is chilly outside. Through COVID, that allowed us to stay open because the county rules where you can only pour in an outdoor area for quite a long time. And this qualified as outdoor space because of one entire wall being open. So that was, it was good for us.
You have a hayseed haiku. Do you want to share that with my listeners?
Oh, yeah. So it's just something we came up with. It's we have a little, what do you call those, pegboards or something? And I'm not sure what you call it. I guess. So it's kind of on display on a board where you punch the letters in and all of that. And it's, a haiku is, 5-syllable, 7-syllable, 5-syllable, 3-line poem, popular in Japan. So this one says, red, white, or rosé, sometimes I just can't decide, think I'll buy them all. So I have that there, mostly like everything else in my space. There are things on display, signage, photographs, all intended to get people talking and opening up to the brand and just engaging with me and feeling comfortable. So this is an example of that. So they see the haiku, they ask me about it, why is it there? And I say, well, it's a challenge to you. If you can come up with a different haiku that helps me sell wine, and you put it on Instagram or Facebook or something like that, I'll replace my pathetic first attempt at a haiku since second grade with yours. And so the criteria is you just have to post it on Instagram, and it has to help me sell wine, and it has to be 5, 7, and 5 syllables respectively. So,
what's your Instagram name?
At Hayseed Wine.
Well, it's a pleasure meeting you, and continued success to you. I hope it continues to grow.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
His web address again is hayseedandhousden.com. Before I continue, here's a pronunciation alert. Having spent many years in Arizona, often just 60 miles from the Mexican border, and having learned quite a bit of Spanish, it's hard for me to say Pas Robles, like the locals and many others do. So I'll stick with the Spanish Pas Robles. It just sounds more natural to me. And probably to Elena Barrios, who along with her winemaker husband Stanley own Top Winery. My sister turned me onto them when she was there and tasted their wines in November because the experience, their pleasant nature, and excellent wine impressed her, as it did my wife Meredith and me. I interviewed Elena as we did a tasting of their wines. So what are we starting off with here?
So we're starting off with our 2020 Jewel, and Jewel's our rosé.
As she poured her rosé of Mourvedre, she explained that she and Stanley fell in love with the rosés of the French Bandol region in Provence. As you'll hear, I liked it as much as they do.
I feel like we have that on tap at our house. We really don't, but I feel like we do. And so when we started Top, my husband had no experience making white wines or rosés. And so he was a little intimidated because, we drank such great rosés. And so he really scouted the right vineyards to be able to create this beautiful bottle. And it's all straight to press, so it's 100% straight to press. We take the unconventional route of aging our rosé for almost 12 months in barrel. Oh. And then the additional unconventional route of aging our wines. So we just released this last month in March. And we released it with 6 months worth of bottle age. And so my husband always says he wants to make a rosé with purpose and intention. He's making it for myself because I love rosé too.
Yes. Some rosés, they don't grab you,
No.
So they almost get the sensation that they're not made with purpose. They're just made to have.
He never wants his rosés to be an afterthought or a secondary product. He wants to it's wine to know that like he's creating it with a purpose. And adding soul to it. Yeah. So we add a little bit of straight to press Grenache to a little bit of Roussanne.
That doesn't surprise me because there's some good flavor on this.
Yeah, a little bit of Grenache Blanc. So it really is a little bit of a blend, but predominantly Mourvedre. So it's a wine that I can't get enough of.
It's such a beautiful bottle too. I love the gold top you have on it, and you use the French spelling of jewel?
Yeah, so it's a source of energy. So we try to use laws of physics to play around with our spinning top motif. And it was one of our members who created this name. Our rosé was nameless for maybe 6 to 8 months. And as I was hosting our guests, I let them know that I'm looking for the perfect name for our rosé. And she was a physicist and said, you know what, jewel, it's a play on words with the color of rosé. It resembles a jewel color. And then we have a fabulous designer. His name is Kevin Contrail Studios. And we pitched the idea of having a spinning top, but also with possibly the silhouette of a rose. So if you turn our bottle upside down, you see the silhouette of a rose. So my husband really threw a curveball at our designer, but oh my gosh, he knocked it off the park. And it's probably one of my favorite label designs. Not only is it my favorite wine, but it's also one of my favorite label designs.
It definitely stands out. Yeah.
Thank you.
I like the name of this GSM blend you have here, Inertia.
Yeah, Inertia. So that was one of our flagships and one of the first wines that we created. So in 2014, we made 200 cases. Of those 200 cases, we made 5 different bottles. So everything that we made that first vintage was like 40 cases, 50 if you were lucky, but I think everything was predominantly 40. And our Inertia has been the wine that my husband loves, and is always one of his fan favorites.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, he just loves the blending process. So you'll notice that all of our wines really are a blend, but this is such a classic blend, Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvedre. And his goal in making Inertia is that when you smell this in the glass, that you're very unsure of what it is. You're not sure if it's Grenache dominant. You're not sure if it's Syrah dominant or Mourvedre. And he feels if you're able to do that, where there's some confusion in regards to what varietal it is, then he's executed the GSM blend correctly.
Wow, yeah.
He never wants it to smell like just Syrah, because then make a Syrah blend. Never wants it to smell just like Grenache, because then make a Grenache blend. But it's always his favorite blend, and it's the blend he starts off with first. So he doesn't want anything that he makes to be like a byproduct of anything. He wants to create the best possible wine. And we've been sourcing fruit from Jada out in Willow Creek since day one, so 2014.
And you said you're sourcing from Carneros a little bit now too?
Yeah, so last year in 2021, we got the opportunity to purchase some Syrah, a little under 2 acres worth of fruit at Hudson Vineyard in Carneros, but the Napa Valley side. And we were so happy because it's one of those things that those contracts don't come regularly, and you have to jump on it. So when we were given the opportunity, we knew we had to say yes. So for us, it's going to be a great addition to our program. We blend all of our wines, so we don't make a vineyard designate. But one thing that we noticed right when the grapes were fermenting is that texture that the Hudson Vineyard offers. So we're super excited for the texture and the aromatics, because it's going to really help elevate our blends.
The texture, the depth of character are common in all of their wines. She's Elena Barrios of Top Winery in Paso Robles. One interesting element I noticed on their tasting notes is that they use a little bit of the white grape Roussanne in the Inertia. But maybe I shouldn't have pointed that out.
That's our secret sauce.
Could I not mention that?
Yeah, no, you totally can. Yeah, so we're big, firm believers of co-fermentation. So if we're able to co-ferment, we feel like the gods above are kind of dictating what they want us to do with it. And so, yeah, we feel like the Roussanne really helps elevate. So I guess it's a GSM-R. But we feel like the Roussanne boosts the aromatics. It softens tannin, because we love tannin. But we understand that our fan base may consume it rather young. And so for those individuals that open our wine earlier than later, it softens it, makes it approachable, but we still have that tannin structure there, so our wines can live for a good amount. We're now revisiting our 14th vintage, so the wine has now lived, 8 years in bottle. Oh, and they're still so young. We're like, wow. We now predict that could last like another 10 years very easily. And so it's so exciting to make wines. And hopefully our goal is that we make these wines and they'll outlive us one day.
And honestly, that would not surprise me. The delightful Elena Barrios of Top Winery. As I mentioned before, they are fairly new to winemaking, but are doing a stellar job. And if you read their website story, it appears Stanley was making wine shortly after his first harvest. That perplexed me. I mean, prior to Top Winery, he was a finance guy who was just a wine enthusiast. So let me ask you, your husband, Stanley, was in the finance world in L.A. He did develop an interest in wine, had tastings with associates. So he did a harvest. And on your website, you say then you bought grapes and he started making wine. Now, there seems to be some gap there. Like, did he get any education at all in enology, or?
Yeah, no, he's 100% self-taught. We really had 10 extraordinary years doing what you're doing, and any visitor that comes to Pas Robles fall in love with wine and fall in love with regions. And so when my husband and I first got married, he was a beer drinker and a cognac drinker. I loved wine because I worked hospitality, and I lived out in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. And so when you live in a wine region, you just fall in love with wine. And so it was always my goal to get him into wine. It just took me one whole year, and
not too bad.
But I just wanted a drinking partner. I wanted a husband where he and I can crack open a few bottles, but he really took it to a whole nother level. Yeah. He became so obsessed with wine that he started researching everything there is to know about that producer, about that region, and just really became a wine nerd. And it was that obsession with wine that I was fine just consuming it on a daily basis. I had no dreams of entering this line of
you're
work.
like, wait, no, I didn't want you to go that far. I didn't want you to make it and have a business out of it.
Yeah, but he literally, in 2013, he was given an opportunity to participate in an internship where he can just come in the cellar, learn how to make wine. And so he saved up in 2013 all his sick time and vacation time from his corporate job to come in the cellar and just learn how to make wine. And I thought it was going to be a thing that he was going to come, get that out of his system, and we were going to go back to LA living. But on day one, he's like, Elena, I love this. Like, this is what I'm meant to do this for the rest of my life. And I could see his facial expression and his voice, and he was just so in love with this process. And so it's been a very long journey to get here, where now we can say very happily, oh, this is all we do. We just focus on top. We focus on what makes us happy, which is make wine, meet people, and drink a little bit of wine too. And there might be some food involved as well.
He must be a natural, though, because he's doing very well with it. I mean, I'm enjoying what I'm drinking here, but to read that you're in restaurants here in town, but also in French Laundry and V Wine Cellars in Yountville. I mean, that's extraordinary.
I think, we started crafting wines that my husband and I enjoy. We always said if we can sell a bottle and we're stuck drinking every single bottle, at least we'll enjoy it. We've just been very fortunate that human beings have also gravitated towards our wine. So we feel so fortunate that some amazing accounts like V Wine Cellars and the French Laundry have picked up our wines. But I think part because we met the right human beings in front of us. I think we met your sister, right? Yeah. And so we just try to treat everyone like family and hope that they'll go and spread the word about us. We're such a small team, so literally our advertisement dollars are zero. So we've realized if you treat people well, guess what? They'll serve as ambassadors for you. So our restaurant accounts and wine shop accounts, we don't have many, but they're great ambassadors. So my husband and I are so fortunate about that. But yeah, so it was his palate. We realized those 10 years of drinking wine, Stanley created an extraordinary palate. I like to say he's a master blender because he really can analyze and sample. And our focus is blending, this vineyard with that vineyard, this varietal with that varietal, typically in the Rhone wheelhouse. And what he brings to the table is just an ability to blend to perfection.
So he's always moving, always in action, kind of like a top.
Yeah, absolutely. So we named our winery Top after a spinning top. So it's a little toy that we played with as children. So we wanted to pay homage to this little toy. But if you analyze...
Which most people don't give a second thought to.
I know, definitely. But if you analyze this little toy, the spinning top, it's just rotating, right? Trying to maintain balance. And that's really what we are trying to do in our professional lives. We know we are busy bees. We're workaholics. We're achievers. We're trying to just keep building for ourselves. And despite us running around, we try to maintain balance. I think we find balance because we are able to do what we love. And stylistically in wine, our concept in wine is make a balanced wine where embrace what nature gives you. We're in Pas Robles. Most of our fruit sources come from Paso. And so that's, we get some fruit content. So embrace that, but also amplify the wonderful things of our AVA, which is the acidity and the tannin that we are able to achieve with our Rhone varietals. So our goal is just making the most balanced wine we possibly can.
That's, it's really easy to think, oh, Top, that's a silly name. But when you describe it that way, it's almost ideal for what you're doing.
I think it's a perfect name for us. Yeah, we were a little unsure early on because, when you're so new to the wine game and you have no street credit, we didn't want to offend anyone, any of our colleagues out here and local community with the name. But if you know Stanley and I, we're pretty humble and we have no ego. And so we hope that the community would give us an opportunity to explain to them why we named our winery Top. And I think now they're digging it and they're vibing with it too.
Stanley is lucky that you have that hospitality and managerial experience because you certainly bring a lot to the table. Yeah,
so when we started this program, him and I, we knew with our skill sets, he has certain skill sets and I have other skill sets that we were going to be able to partner very, very well. So I, by no means am I perfect or is he perfect, but we're perfect together. And we run a little perfect ship too. So what is my weakness is his strength, and what his weakness, it's my strength. So it's a nice little balance.
You mentioned earlier you do well with word of mouth, but that's about all you have going for you because you don't get the name out there very much, and you actually are kind of, as you mentioned, a speakeasy. Yeah. You don't even have a sign on your fence out there. You really have to know where you're going to find it.
Yeah, we love that. We're kind of like a little excursion, and we really are a winery of referral based. If it's referral based, that meant that individual took time to share with their friends and family our style of wine and our experience that we offer. And so that really for us is the best person to walk in through our doors. We take everyone. Sometimes we'll have folks stumble upon us because they liked our name. We've had that happen.
But where did they see that name? Because it's not out front.
Oh, no, not out front, no. But maybe in an article that they read, or on the Pas Robles Wine County Alliance guide.
Or in a restaurant.
In the restaurant or the visitor guide. So just really interesting ways that they have stumbled across our name. People come from different referral base, but usually it's a referral.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, because you're going to be working in the Hospice du Rhone event, and just within an hour, you're going to head over there, as are we. I'm working with my wife's winery, Ramsgate. It's going to be a fun day to meet people and pour some good wine.
But I think we started off right.
We did.
We started off with a great interview and some hugs first.
Some wonderful wine.
And it's going to give us the energy to be able to go entertain now.
Yeah, it was a good warm-up for the 4-hour event that day. Top Winery has a modern mid-century sort of design tasting room. Their address is on the website, but it's not terribly accurate. And there is another tasting room next door. Visit topwinery.com to see Elena and Stanley's story. It wasn't disclosed, but I believe you have to be a member to access their wine or book a tasting. The guests I featured on this podcast are a microcosm of the diverse and unique personalities you'll find in the Paso Robles area. It's ripe for grape growing and wine sharing. I hope you enjoyed this excursion to San Luis Obispo County. You can find more interviews and wine trivia at onthewineroad.us or .com. I'm on Facebook /onthewineroad, and I'm on Instagram as JD Wine Road. The podcast theme was written by Miguel de Oliveira, and the program is researched, written, and produced by me. And I appreciate you listening. I'll catch you next time on The Wine Road. I'm Jeff Davis.